All right, so you are all at Nourishing Resilience. Again, thank you so much for being here. We are the Safe Infant Feeding Team, SAFE Team, and we are trying our best to spread the word. So thank you for being part of that. Now, first of all, of course, we have to start with a little bit of thank yous and appreciation. One of those is to the Gillings School of Global Public Health and the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute. They have been really instrumental in supporting us in designing trainings. Some of the training materials and images that you'll see here are the intellectual property of CGBI because of the work that they did with it, and they're kindly letting us use those for this training. We also want to give a shout out to Marcia Brady Tucker Foundation. They are, at this point, the main funding and the reason why we were able to offer this for free to everyone. So they have been a wonderful support in us with this work. We also have a few sponsors, Breastfeeding Family Friendly Communities. We'll hear a little bit more about the sponsors close to the end of the presentation. Confident Pregnancy and the Birthstone Center for Appalachian Perinatal Resilience are also key sponsors of this work. So this is session 1, where we are going to talk about a little bit of why this is important, the mindset that we need to have in order to be able to really do this work well. And we're going to go through the Rapid Needs Assessment, which was an instrument that was key to us in being able to help understand what it was that people we encountered in the field really needed. To get started, let's go ahead and introduce today's trainers. I'm first going to go ahead and hand it off to Norma and let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted to see so many people here and our wonderful international representation. I see one of my country people here. And it's delightful to have this kind of response. So thank you so much for being here. I'm Norma Escobar. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant and La Leche League leader. I live on the coast of North Carolina, but I'm originally from Mexico. I've worked in public health, including shelters during emergencies for 15 years, and I worked on the ground with the SAFE team for 8 weeks after Helene hit, from October 2024 through January 2025. I'm one of the main trainers for this series, so I'm very excited to be here. Melinda. You get to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Norma. I'm Melinda Delisle. I'm a certified Lamaze childbirth educator, a soon-to-be CNS with a master's in human nutrition, and I've been involved in the perinatal space in some way or another since 2000. I also have a background in business and own my own company, Confident Pregnancy. And I got involved with the SAFE team. I was actually the main boots on the ground coordinator for 4 months of the response from November through the end of February, when we had to slow down our operations. I'm excited to be here. I love creating systems. I love helping others get inspired to institute some of the systems that we have developed and to hopefully help you improve your own. And right now, I'd love for us to also introduce today's digital support. We have a couple of people from the team who are going to be helping out on the tech side of things. Our main 2 digital support people are Ashley and Rachel. So Ash, do you want to go ahead and do a quick intro?
Hi, I am Ashley, and I am a speech language pathologist, and I'm also an education consultant. I am from North Texas. I took the call to help in North Carolina, and I worked boots on the ground for 3 different weeks throughout that span. And I was also a digital coordinator that supported the team on the ground. I'm super excited, and I'm so happy that we have such a big group to be able to elevate infant and children in feeding in emergencies. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ash. Rachel, would you go ahead and...
Yeah, hi, my name is Rachel Fan. and I am also a speech language pathologist, and I'm a certified lactation counselor. I am originally from Western North Carolina, born and raised just outside of Asheville, and I currently live in Central North Carolina, where I work in private practice with infants and young children, and I'm a bilingual speech therapist, so I work a lot with our Latino community here in North Carolina. And I volunteered to help with the SAFE team way back in October, right after Hurricane Helene, and worked as one of the digital coordinators and also on the ground a little bit from October all the way up until now. So it's really wonderful to have everyone here, and thank you all for joining us.
So yes, I did want to also mention that everybody here, Ash and Rachel, they worked primarily as digital coordinators, but they did come and help us out on the ground as well. So we also have with us a few other members of the SAFE team who I don't want to take the time to get everybody introduced, but Love Anderson, Brandy Harrison, Corey, Graywood, Tashery, Paris. My apologies, I've got animals going a little bit crazy in the next room. So we're going to go ahead. If I forgot anybody, my deep apologies. First of all, go ahead, Norma. You wanted to handle this one?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take this one. These presentations are going to show images of bottles, teats, and commercial milk formula due to the contents and risk of use. It's not a promotion of these products. We say that because in lactation, we're very attuned to the WHO code of marketing of breast milk substitutes. So we wanted to reassure all of you that the SAFE team is fully supportive of the WHO's code of marketing of breast milk substitute and subsequent resolutions.
Great. Thank you so much.
So we're going to go to the first poll instead. And this first poll is about your hopes for this training. We know we have a variety of participants from various geographical regions and lots of emergency response experience or very little. So we do hope that that you come here with a little bit of curiosity. Are you most interested in skills for disaster? What do I mean by skills for disaster? That's going to be like preparing your community, general emergency services, policy change, where, if you are an infant feeding specialist, where you fit. Are you more interested in skills for actually supporting infant feeding and family support, like practical skills to help support families? How to make a sanitation kit, how to make congregate areas more friendly. Are you more interested in tips for collaboration and team management? And this is going to be collaborating during a response with emergency response, managing volunteers, managing donations? Or are you most interested in skills for well-being and resilience, which is covering responder stress, fatigue, and contributing to community resilience? I think we've got most people, most people have answered. Let's see. We got about 80% of people have answered. We'll give you 10 more seconds to respond. And Rachel, if you could go ahead and end that poll. We got about 90% participation, so we can share where people are. Okay, so we're going to cover all these topics, but it sounds like almost 50% of you are most interested in those skills for disaster and preparedness response, which is great. That's exactly why we're here.
Fantastic. All right. So we are going to start with some mindsets, because here's the thing. If you've ever done any disaster work, you know that it's not like normal life. Okay, so the first thing I want everybody to do is I want you to take your finger and point it up in the air. Okay, and we're actually going to go ahead and take your hand right above you. I'm going to do it lower so that you can see me. And I want you to turn your finger basically what you would consider clockwise. All right, and look at that finger going clockwise. Now keep going. And I want you to bring your finger down so that it's now below the level of your chin. What happened to the direction your finger is going in? Does anybody want to give me a little bit of feedback in the chat? What happened? If you're not sure, go ahead and try again. Point up above you, get that finger going in a clockwise direction, and bring it down. Keep going, keep going, keep going, and down. Yeah, it looks like it changed rotation. Okay, but did it? Here's the thing. Did your finger did you change the motion that you were doing? What actually did change is perspective. Okay, so the perspective is really, really, really important. The way we are looking at things is going to be super important for being able to see what it is that we need to, not only what we need to do, but how to get there. So having this mindset of creativity, looking at things differently, making those shifts is going to help you, if you get into a situation like this, to be able to see what you need to see. I do want to acknowledge one thing that I saw fly by in the chat, which is that, yes, if you have been through trauma, some of the things that we talk about may be triggering. Okay, that is actually why we're going to talk about the history, and one of the first things we're going to talk about is how do we work with some of that? How do we work with it in others? How do we work with it in ourselves? So let's get back to the slideshow. All right, so Norma, you want to take over with what in the world is IYCF-E?
So what is IYCF-E? It stands for Infant and Young Child Feeding in Emergencies, and it's about protection and support of optimal feedings for infants and young children in all type of emergencies. It is not coercing people into breastfeeding. It is not making choices for them that go beyond their capability or their circumstance or their individual will. It is about focusing on those most vulnerable. If you were able to do the module introduction that the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute created for us on Introduction to IYCF-E, you'll know that we're talking about infants, which are birth to completed 11 months, and young children, which are 12 to completed 23 months. I will say that in our work in Western North Carolina, we also served families with children that were a little bit older than this, typically under 3. Anyone that was drinking from a device that was bottle or bottle-like. So this included training cups. In the United States, they're called sippy cups. I know in the outside of the U.S. they have different names. But anything that was difficult to clean, and that's because we had a lot of issues with water. So we covered not just those little ones, but also some of the older preschool age kids. So what counts as an emergency? Go ahead and in the chat, just go ahead and answer. What counts as an emergency? Yes, absolutely, hurricanes. I live in coastal North Carolina, and hurricanes are something that we see all the time. Yes, all those natural disasters, right? But yeah, it could be other things like long-term power loss or water insecurity, right? Anything. Yeah, electrical grid outages, hazmat situations, pandemics like the one that we recently all went through, wars, yeah, refugee type of situations, any disturbance, right? So all those things are great. So we do have some, examples of emergencies there. You guys covered them well. Anytime that families are displaced, anytime that safe water or electricity or sanitation or transportation or communication is disrupted, when families are not able to access the things that they need in order to take care of themselves and their children. How do you think emergency situations create challenges to the safe and appropriate feeding of infants? Go ahead and launch that poll. And this is a short answer. So you've got 200 characters. So don't give me a dissertation, just a couple words or a phrase. How do emergency situations create challenges to the safe and appropriate feeding of infants? The biggest challenge in terms of safe feeding is going to be when you have families separated. Because if you separate an infant or a young child from their caretaker, that makes breastfeeding very difficult, as we all know, right? But there's also that loss of clean, private areas to feed children. There's, of course, if there's a power outage, parents that had frozen breast milk or that had formula that was in there, all that's going to spoil. There could be problems with water. There could be limited supplies. And we definitely saw all these during Helene. Misinformation about breastfeeding. And we know also that families that are marginalized and they're already at a disadvantage and have limited resources are typically the most impacted. All right. So why is this important? Well, it's really important because infants, children, and pregnant and lactating people are very vulnerable, right, during emergencies, particularly to malnutrition. If you were able to watch the video in the e-learning module, according to an organization called Save the Children, about 15,000 infants die each day, and 50% of them are in emergency settings. Most of these deaths are actually from gastrointestinal illness and pneumonia, which we know breastfeeding can be highly protective. And this is really important because the world is experiencing an increase in disaster and emergency types of events. We know that the earth is warmer. We know there's more droughts. The storms that we do have tend to be more intense. When there's drought, the possibility of fires are higher. And then rising sea levels are going to expose higher and higher locations, not usually exposed to the power of the sea, to the erosive forces of the waves and such. In the US, which many of us here are in the United States, the future of agencies such as FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, are uncertain. And the agencies that ensured the safety of our water and our food supplies are losing staff and they're losing funding. So we know that emergencies are becoming and will continue to become more prevalent. And as communities and individuals, we need to be ready to respond to those emergencies in order to protect the most vulnerable. Many of us in this room are infant feeding specialists, and so we understand that chest feeding and breastfeeding is a child survival skill, and it's a strategy. It's not just a nice to have. It can literally save lives. We know it's full nutrition without contamination. We know it's safe and affordable. And we do know that it's safe during stress and hunger. And that's a really common, I saw it fly by in the chat. It's a really common belief that stress is going to affect the mother's milk supply. We're going to talk more about that because that is something that we came across. The parents were very worried about, and we were able to help manage that. We also know that even though breastfeeding in the US has hit an all-time high with initiations over close to 90% and above, we also know that drops off as babies get older. So at 6 months, we're around that 60% mark, and at a year, and this is rates of any breastfeeding. Exclusive breastfeeding, however, those rates are actually lower. So in an emergency, yes, those babies that are exclusively breastfed directly from the chest are going to be well protected. However, we do know that we're also going to encounter a lot of people who are also using artificial milks and commercial milk formulas. So why is this important? Because children that rely on formula are at highest risk. During an emergency, it can be difficult to obtain feeding supplies. It can be difficult to obtain things for sanitation, items for cleaning the supplies, and there may be a lack of safe water for mixing formula as well as cleaning the supplies. So we're going to go into a little bit of history, right? Hurricane Helene made a devastating impact on the whole southeastern part of the United States in late September of 2024. We're actually celebrating 1 year of Hurricane Helene. Landfall occurred in the Big Bend region of Florida on September 26th, and the storm made its way through Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina before arriving in the western part of North Carolina and in Tennessee on September 27th. At least 250 people were killed across 6 states, with most of those deaths occurring in North Carolina. The majority of those deaths were attributed to the catastrophic inland flooding, not the initial storm surge. This makes Helene the deadliest hurricane in the contiguous United States since Katrina 20 years ago. The highest rainfall with this storm was recorded in North Carolina, where totals reached over 30 inches, which is 76 centimeters in a 3-day period. This extreme rain, combined with a pre-existing weather system that had dumped another 10 inches in the week before, led to historic flooding and mudslides. The French Broad River in Asheville, North Carolina, reached a record crest, surpassing its 1916 record by over 1.5 feet, so almost half a meter for my metric folks in the room. Avery County experienced its worst flooding in recorded history, and hundreds of roads were destroyed. Entire communities, such as Chimney Rock, were largely destroyed, and the storm's economic impact was estimated of up to $200 billion across all the affected states, which meant practically that infrastructure shut down. Hospitals, doctors were overrun. The hospital had really a hard time working because there was no potable water in Asheville for 7 weeks. Families were displaced, they were separated, they were confused, and many areas were very difficult to get to. All right, let's go to the next one. So these 2 ladies in this picture, you can see Brandy, she's actually in the meeting today. Brandy Harrison and Janie Carpenter realized that breastfeeding, which of course we know is the safest way to feed babies, was feeling very fragile in the middle of this tide of uncertainty. We had questions like, will my milk dry up? Can I breastfeed even if I haven't eaten in 3 days? Will I be hurting my baby if all I've eaten all day is the same canned food? And it became apparent that these breastfeeding families needed a lot of reassurance, that they had everything they needed for their babies to empower them to continue breastfeeding. But the normal supports were paralyzed. The WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children program, which serves half the children in the United States, those agencies were closed. Local providers were displaced, and people didn't know where to turn for help. So these 2 amazing pioneers, Brandy Harrison and Janie Carpenter, stepped up to help, hiking when they needed to get to families. And they realized that there were not enough local providers available and that the support systems were shut down and overwhelmed. And that's when they called out for help. They also saw, Janie and Brandy also saw the needs of the parents who had been pumping or who had been formula reliant or who were using donated milk. And they quickly recognized the potential risks associated when babies are not exclusively breastfed, when there's no safe water for mixing formula or for cleaning feeding equipment, where there's no power, no refrigeration for storage, and when families are scared and desperate. So, Melinda, you take this poll.
Let's talk about the poll. So, what do you think? True or false? Do you believe the United States has federal policies which incorporate IYCF-E principles into disaster response? And so 86% of you say that it's false. You must have been reading our marketing because we found disturbingly and surprisingly that none of the federal response, there were not had anything around safe infant and young child feeding in emergencies. Now, there are guidelines from the CDC. There are guidelines out there that people are supposed to follow, but this was not part of FEMA's response, nor was it actually part of any of the response or the systems that existed with other major disaster response organizations. This was something that was shocking to us. So What we did find is that there was no agency at all that was focused on families with infants and young children, and there were also not agencies that had it as an integral part of their response. We have found this to still be the case even as we get to know more and more and more different agencies in disaster response. There's a lack of public knowledge of what to do. People in areas impacted by a disaster, they don't know how to work with problems with the water and all these things we're going to discuss. The responders themselves don't know what response needs to happen. They don't know how to handle formula donations. They don't know how to work with people who are impacted. And that creates donation management challenges. How do we work with the donations that flooded in? So our beloved Love Anderson had something she said, that when no one is in charge, it means we're all responsible. So basically, Brandy and Janie, Brandy got on the phone with Love, said, we need help because there's not enough expertise, there are not enough people here in Western North Carolina to do what we need to do to help these parents and these families and these caregivers with young children. And when they looked it up online, basically Google AI's suggestion was, well, look to your local breastfeeding coalition. And they said, well, that's us, and Love responded to Brandy with, do you really want 20 of you? And called it in. So we were using the local birth center, Lilac Birth Center, that was letting us have some space. We eventually moved to a larger venue, the Orange Peel. We had a whole team of people come in. We gathered a core group of amazing, wonderful women who were advocates and passionate about this, and we created this SAFE Team, which stands for Support and Advocacy for Infant Feeding Emergencies. So it was a group effort. We called ourselves the NCBFC SAFE Team, but really it was a coalition between the North Carolina Breastfeeding Coalition, Breastfeeding Family Friendly Communities, local lactation and perinatal professionals in Western North Carolina, the Gillings UNC Carolina, Global Breastfeeding Institute, and other people. We had hundreds of volunteers come and join us to help out with this effort in Western North Carolina, for which we are so very thankful, because none of this would have been able to happen really without all of these groups coming together. So we learned that we had to figure out what the risks were to specific families and assess them. We found, as Norma's mentioned previously, sanitation was a huge issue. Trying to keep things clean when literally the dirt on the ground is toxic is really, really challenging. Safe water. Yes, they had water cubes all over the place, but not everybody even knew that their wells weren't safe or that the creek wasn't safe. Lots of information, maybe some misinformation, lots of misinformation was being distributed as well, and trying to make sure that people had the information that they needed to really keep themselves safe. Supporting those formula distribution sites, in helping make sure that that was going to be safe, and making sure people had the feeding supplies they needed, and managing some of the human milk sharing that was already going on when we started finding it in the area. So let's take a pause for a moment, because we've talked about the history. This may have brought up some thoughts and things for you. And one of the things that is an integral part of doing any kind of disaster work, unfortunately, is stress and trauma. Everybody who's impacted by an emergency is going to have some kind of stress and traumatic response, whether they realize it or not. And working with people who've had that is very different than working with us who are in a safe place, because we are not going to respond the same way. We're going to, so what is this trauma response? What's that thing that happens to us? Basically, it's just that threat response. The scientific name is sympathetic dominance. Don't worry about that. It's fight or flight, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It's that thing that happens to us when we pop into survival mode because there's a threat and we don't know how to deal with that threat. And therefore, everything in our body goes on high alert. When the threat goes away, that doesn't necessarily go away. Okay? It is a normal response, and it is one of those things that both impacted people and the responders experience trauma. Okay, if you go into a disaster area and you are talking with people and hearing their stories or seeing the devastation, that can impact us and flip us into this survival response as well. People might feel numb or seem like they're cold or distant. If you ever talk to somebody after an emergency and they just kind of like are a little bit staring into space, not really responsive, that's a trauma response. They might express emotion randomly. It might seem like it's unsuitable to what's going on. Or you might be in a conversation and somebody might suddenly start crying or raging or expressing frustration. They might be easily triggered or combative. We ran into many of these. Our volunteers in the field saw this kind of thing. People might have difficulty making decisions. You might say, "Hey, what do you need?" And they'd be like, I don't know. I don't know. Because they're incapable of making decisions from that state of mind. People might not be able to respond at all. They might not remember what happened. All of these things can happen to us when we've had these kinds of stresses and traumas. So things to consider. Of course we want to be kind and empathic. If we had time, we would actually go ahead and model some of this, but make sure that we are curious about what's going on, taking into consideration that people are having emotions, even if they tell us they're not. Try to be very clear in the communication. We don't want to beat around the bush. We want to be clear and direct while also being kind. We can offer emotional support. If somebody looks like maybe they could use a hug, we can ask them, "Would you like a hug?" We don't want to force anything on somebody because not everyone, feels comforted in the same way. But we can offer. Gratitude I put down here with a question mark because a lot of times when we're in that survival response, we can't access gratitude. Yes, being thankful for things is wonderful, but if someone seems like all they can see is the negative right now, that's just the trauma response. It's okay for somebody to not be grateful, if they are post-trauma. It's also okay if they only want to talk about being grateful. "Oh, I'm just so grateful." Definitely we have to make sure we're respectful. Offer, do not force. We have to respect other people's decisions, their lifestyle, their their knowledge of what is right for them. What are some techniques that help you deal with stress, intense situations, lack of control, emotional triggers when things come up? Okay, I'm seeing grounding, music, walking, things like prayer, silence, yoga and guided breathing, box breathing, lots of deep breathing. Some people want to do things like be with others, move their body, talking, breath work, lots of music. Okay, awesome. I'm seeing lots of wonderful responses here. So, one thing I want to draw attention to as we're talking about resilience, those are all wonderful suggestions. I've found, and as you look at the research, you'll find that this is a big shift, okay? When someone's actually in a trauma response, in that survival mode, some of the things that help us when we're just moving through regular daily life may not help. So you may find that if someone is truly in a triggered space, truly in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, asking them to take a few deep breaths, they might not be able to. Somebody who is in the middle of responding to an emergency might not be able to work through meditation. Just finding that way to like ground themselves might not happen at all. So what are some things that we can look at? We have to look at both what helps us stay resilient and what helps us get resilient. So a lot of what you guys listed in the chat are the kinds of things that help us stay balanced. If we do it before we get triggered, it's going to help us have that resilience. Things like rest, things like taking walks, eating healthy food, staying hydrated, doing our prayer or meditation or grounding or those kinds of things. Do that before you get into the stressful situations and ongoing, and that really helps us. This is a super, super important thing to remember as you work with volunteers or go into disaster response yourself. Take breaks. It is so easy to get into a space where you see the need and to push ourselves longer than we should, to forget about eating the good food, to forget to drink, to forget to take the breaks. If we're not taking care of ourselves, then we can't take care of others. It's a cliche, but that whole thing of put on your own oxygen mask first, we really have to. It's absolutely essential. And taking a little bit of time to express to others who understand. That's also important. So when it comes to regaining equilibrium, now this is when we're already feeling unbalanced. Okay? Things that help are things like breathing. A lot of times breathing with some sound, making deep breaths, sighing with that breath. A lot of this really helps a lot. Shaking or dancing. I saw at least one person in the chat talked about moving your body. This is a great one because it literally helps move the chemicals, the stress chemicals through our bodies. Crying and expressing emotions. This is not a very popular one. Not a lot of people want to admit that this is something we need to do, but you need to take the time to actually cry, to actually express it. There's a technique called bilateral stimulation. We're going to try one of these, real quick in a moment. Vagus nerve stimulation. As we go through the series, I'm going to try to bring in one of these, here and a few of these here and there to help us practice some of them. But these are all evidence-based ways that help people who are already in a triggered response to be able to regain some of that equilibrium. Okay, so it says some techniques, we're going to do just one. So what I would love is if you're in a space where you could literally stand up. Okay, if you can actually stand up, we're going to start by just take a nice big deep breath and let yourself breathe it out with just like a make a lot of noise with it. Move your body while you're doing it. And take a moment now. We're going to take one more breath. Breathe it in, and as you let this one go, I want you to shake your whole body if this is something you can do. If you can't stand up, then just do it while you're sitting down. Shake yourself around. Move your arms, move your legs. Another breath. How do you feel? Doing something like that, even when we're already in a very emotional space, can really go a long way towards helping move those emotion chemicals through, letting things go out of our muscles, getting rid of some of that tension. And it doesn't take very long. It's something we can go ahead. You could put on music, dance to it, and doing all of those things. That's just one way to really work with moving that stress through. So before I hand it off to Norma, I just want to say, it sounds like it's not important, but really, when it comes to healthcare providers, emergency responders, people impacted by disaster, taking care of your mental health is one of the keys to making sure that you can continue to do this work, that you can continue to be somebody that you can that can help and be healthy and have your own enjoyable life.
Thank you, Melinda. It really, It really makes a difference because our ability to make good decisions are hampered by some of these stress chemicals. So we really need to deal with these in order that for us to be able to assist people who are already stressed, right? To be able to make better decisions for their family. So we're going to transition into the assessment and triage of using the rapid needs assessment. Our team started with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. They have a rapid needs assessment tool. We also found that it was very focused on a very small shelter population, and it wasn't really so great for some of the things that we were doing. So we had to adapt it to our setting, make it our own. But before we jump into it, we're going to do a very quick activity. Go ahead and show us that slide. Thank you, Melinda. Okay, so you walk in to either a point of distribution, a distribution center, or a shelter, or a church, somewhere, right? You've been affected by an emergency, a disaster. Someone sees you holding a baby and hands you a can like this of infant formula. We're going to go into breakout rooms for a very short 2 minutes. In your group, I want you to talk to each other and tell us, what do you do now? What else do you need to feed your baby? So Rachel, if you could make those breakout rooms for 3 to 4 people, that would be great. And literally 2 minutes. So quick, say hi to everyone and start talking about. Someone just handed you a can like this of infant formula. What do you do now? What else do you need?
And for people who are watching the replay, take some time to think about this, jot down on a piece of paper, what are the different things that you would need in order to be able to utilize this can of formula that you've gotten after an emergency occurred.
So let's talk about it. How did that go? And did anything surprise you? What did you find in the chat?
We had a conversation we were surprised that we would assume if you're holding a baby, somebody would hand you formula and say, here, you can feed the baby.
Thank you.
Our first thought was, can we ask additional information? Like, is this a formula fed baby, or is this baby being fed at the chest?
I was hoping someone would catch that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Anyone else want to add anything? Yeah. Why do I need this? Yeah, exactly. Someone knows better than me, right? Why? I must need this, right? If someone hands you this without asking any questions, you're going to assume that you need it, particularly if you're in a trauma type of response. It creates a lot of doubt. We don't even know if this is my baby, correct? Right. And now what do? Do I have a bottle? Do I have water to mix it? Do I have a place, a clean place? Or am I going to have to use a public bathroom to wash whatever bottles I brought with me, if I brought with me? You guys, what's the expression? Absolutely. Do I have a place to sit and feed my baby? Right. So many things to consider. So that's the purpose of this, right? So the first thing that we need to kind of decide, right, is how is this family feeding their baby to begin with, right? If they're breastfeeding, direct breastfeeding, those families absolutely have to be kept together, and they're going to need a safe, clean, and comfortable place to feed their babies. They are going to need access to trained counselors, hopefully to people who are supportive of breastfeeding. Hopefully there's access to peer support or a supportive community, other mothers who have breastfed, right? If the child is older than 6 months, they're going to need appropriate and adequate complementary foods, right? If the child is actually dependent on formula, they're going to need access to appropriate and safe formula with instructions in their language. They're going to need access to potable water. They're going to need access to appropriate feeding items. If they're expressing milk, they need access to items that they need, or for hand expression, right? Ability to even wash their hands. Sometimes when everything's contaminated, it just, that dust covers everything, and washing your hands can be a process, and safely washing your hands. It's very, very hard to do. They need tools to properly clean and disinfect items, whether they're using pumps or you're using bottles. They're going to need appropriate storage location for those items, and they're going to need instructions and support, right? All these kinds of things. Is this formula going to be accessible after the storm, right? That's the other thing. All these things need to be considered. These caregivers, whether they're breastfeeding or bottle feeding, are going to need a lot of psychological, psychosocial, and emotional support. Okay, well, so how do we know what's needed? Go ahead and put in the chat. We're not going to do this poll because those polls aren't turning out like we had hoped they would turn out. Go ahead and write on there. A lot of times we think, oh, it's breast or bottle, and it's actually not that simple. What are different ways to feed a baby? With a spoon, absolutely. With a syringe, yes. With a cup, right? With an SNS, which is at the breast supplementer, okay? Right? A shot glass, mixed feeding, when the mother is doing some breastfeeding and some formula, right? Breastfeeding directly, breastfeeding from a family member, right? They could be pumping only, right? They could be hand expressing only, right? They could be doing all sorts of things. So this whole thing about breast or bottle, it's not a binary thing. There's all sorts of different ways that that people feed their babies. They could even have a G tube, right? We had some babies and some older kids that were dependent on gastro tubes, okay? Right? Exactly, tube-fed infants. So if you look at that list of different ways, right, of feeding babies, it's not black or white. The exclusive breastfeeding or chest feeding baby has the fewest needs. Everyone else is going to need access to clean water, soap, bleach, bottle brush, items, right, that in order to clean and sanitize and feed safely. All right. This is where the CDC's Rapid Needs Assessment tool comes in, right? I'm trying to follow the chat a little bit too. And this was a tool, like I said in the introduction, that we found needed a little bit of adaptation. Okay, you can find it. It's on the CDC website. There's a QR code right there, and it will be part of your homework to review this tool so that you don't use it as a checklist. You don't use it as a like end all be all, but that you are able to really work with it. The goal of this tool is to get to the heart of what each family needs in very short time frame, very short conversations. Okay. All right. Ideally under 2 minutes, and sometimes our conversations were 30 seconds, right? It's really, really important to make it your own and to adapt it to the needs of the circumstance that you're in. It's not an interview. It's not a checklist. Okay. It's something that you may or may not need all the questions that are on it. Okay, it's really what we found is when we started using it, we did start using a checklist. I will confess, we printed the forms out and we were going through, and we realized really quickly that the focus did not need to be on the paper; it needed to be on the people. This is some of the things that we learned. We found that empathetic communication goes a really long way versus the checklist method, and that open-ended questions provide a lot more information. So we're going to do a quick demo and we're going to kind of just breeze through this. So if we could stop the share and spotlight my demo partner and myself. All right, there's Ashley. There's Ashley. Thank you. All right, Miss Ashley, you are coming into a distribution center holding your 4-month-old baby. And I'm really busy there in the distribution center talking to families, but also looking through formula, sorting through, make sure nothing's expired, and you're looking at everything. Hi, I'm Norma with the Safe Infant Feeding Team. Can I help you find something?
I'm looking for formula to supplement my baby. I was just wondering which one would be the best kind.
All right. It's, I'm so glad that you're here. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you're feeding your baby?
Well, we've been breastfeeding.
That's great. That's great that you've been breastfeeding. That is absolutely the very best way to feed your baby, especially in this time. How is that going?
I mean, he seems to be doing okay, but I'm so worried.
Yeah, lots of moms worry, especially after the storm. Tell me a little bit more about your baby.
His name is Jack, and he's only 4 months old.
Oh, I can tell that you really are in love with him. Tell me, what made you want to add some formula to his diet since if you've been mostly breastfeeding?
Here. You want me to jump in on you with you?
Okay, yes, thank you.
Okay.
So I can tell this is a big concern. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead and jump in.
I'm worried that I'm not making a good enough milk. We've been eating canned tuna and crackers for days.
I can tell you're very concerned about this. It sounds like all you want is what's best for your baby. He is so lucky to have you. What was your initial goal in terms of for feeding your baby?
Well, I wanted to breastfeed for as long as I can.
Well, that's great. We can help you do that. It sounds like your main concern is making good milk while you've been eating what you could. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's it. Can I still make good milk if I don't eat well?
Absolutely. You can make perfect milk even if you're just eating tuna and crackers. It really is scary to think that you might not be able to feed your baby because your diet's not great. Maybe I can help you get some food for you. Do you think that might set your mind at ease a little bit?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
All right, let me walk you over to the adult food section and they can get you set up. But here's my number because you're going to have more questions about breastfeeding again. But I'm so glad we met today. Just keep breastfeeding your baby, okay?
Oh, I'm glad to. Thank you.
So that was just a short demo based on some of the things that we um, we heard. So one of the things that you'll see in the CDC rapid needs assessment is that there's a lot of yes or no questions. And we really want to encourage you to think more broadly. So instead of, the moms that are breastfeeding, do you use a breast pump and that kind of, tell me more. Can you tell me more about how breastfeeding or expressing your milk is going for you? Instead of like, what's your name? What's your baby's name? Are you the parent? It's so nice to meet you. Who do you have with today? Or can you tell me more about your family? Instead of what are you feeding your, are you feeding breast milk? Are you feeding formula? Are you feeding cow's milk? Are you feeding soy milk? Are you doing solids? May I ask you, how are you feeding your baby? Or what are you feeding your baby? If mothers or families are feeding formula, tell me more about how feeding your child is going for you. Do you have what you need? What else, what else are you feeding your baby? For example, if there's, sometimes we did encounter children who had other needs. So asking them, what else? Are there any issues at birth that affected your baby's feeding, like being born small or early or sick? Is there anything else you want to tell us? And then we also found it that it was really important to ask people if they needed supplies to clean their bottles and their pump pieces, and to make water safe. So it is important to remind families to ask staff for any supplies, support, or information that they need. We didn't have to ask staff because we were able to supply these for them, but that's something else to consider. Hopefully, through a rapid needs assessment, you will be able to find out if the family needs lactation support, if they need donor milk, if they need ready-to-feed formula, if they need infant feeding supplies like bottles or cups, if they need appropriate solid foods, because meals ready to eat, the things that come in packages that are for the Army that a lot of distribution centers get from the government, are not appropriate food for young children. And then what kind of education do they need? Do they need help with hand expression? Do they need help with cup feeding? Do they need help, information for safe formula preparation? Exactly. Make it a conversation. And any other needs, because a lot of the times we found is that families didn't just have feeding needs, they had lots of other needs as well. So making sure that you're making space for whatever else this family needs. You may not be able to provide it, but you may be able to refer families. Any kind of medical needs, please refer. Of course, lactation concerns are important to refer if you're not trained. If you're trained, our volunteers were able to handle many of these educational needs. We had a lot of lactation consultants, lactation educators, and counselors. These are all really important things to ask. In the field, it's important to adapt to whatever your situation. So here's some things that we found we had to ask that are not on this particular checklist. What's your water source? Okay, because a lot of people had well water that had flooded, and that water is not safe. How are you cleaning your bottles and your pump parts or your feeding items? If they say, oh, I'm boiling them, okay, how are you boiling the water? I had a family tell me that they were boiling it on their little camp stove and they were running out of propane. So, now they need propane, or they need to learn how to use bleach to cold sanitize. Yeah, Dad was building a fire to heat up stuff. And how are you storing unused milk or formula? We had people thinking that those big 32 ounces, just because they're shelf stable, could be left unrefrigerated. So lots of really interesting situations that we came up with. Is there anything that you need? We always want to make sure that sometimes we can't take care of their needs, but we want to make sure that we're there to listen and hopefully steer them in the right direction. Yes, Corey, shelf stable when unopened is very different than open. So things that we want to learn is, how are they feeding? How do they want to feed? What was their initial goal? What's their water source? How are they cleaning things? How are they sanitizing things? What's their power source, particularly if they're having to store human milk or store formula? What other kind of storage situation do they have? Do they need storage containers for their milk? Okay, things to look for. Does the mom or the baby look dehydrated? Do they look very thin? Do they look lethargic? Do they look sick or ill? Things, so you don't just listen with your ears, you listen with your eyes and with your heart. Other things, any changes in feeding. We were breastfeeding, but now we're doing something else, right? Are there any lactation issues? Yes, I got discharged, but my baby's not latching. Do they have safe water? Can they access safe water? Do they need any kind of supplies? Are they storing things properly? Do they have power to store things properly? What kind of needs does the caregiver have? Because if the caregiver is not well, they're going to have a hard time taking care of those babies, and any emotional needs.
All right. Thank you so much for all of that, Norma. I know we kind of flew through that, but we will be practicing the rapid needs assessment next time. So you'll have some time to review the CDC rapid needs assessment, kind of an outline of the way that the rapid needs assessment often went with our volunteers in the field. And we'll be practicing those in breakout rooms next time. So we're going to do homework and then questions in just a couple moments. But before we do that, I want to say some thanks to the people, the organizations that have made this possible. The Marcia Brady Tucker Foundation, they have, as I said, they're the main source of funding for this program, and we are deeply grateful for them and being able to make this happen. One of our major sponsors has been Breastfeeding Family-Friendly Communities. And just a quick little bit about them. Breastfeeding Family-Friendly Communities provides technical assistance to breastfeeding coalitions and health departments across the U.S., including Breastfeed Durham, Breastfeeding Family-Friendly Communities of Asheville, and the North Carolina Breastfeeding Coalition. Our newest project, the SAFE Team, revealed national gaps in infant and young child feeding during emergencies. Our core mission of systems change uses the 10 steps to a breastfeeding family-friendly community to train and educate non-lactating community members to better welcome families, normalize breastfeeding, and prepare for safe infant feeding in emergencies. Together, we build environments where every family can thrive. And we're deeply grateful to the breastfeeding family-friendly communities. We have also Confident Pregnancy and Birthstone. And briefly, Confident Pregnancy helps people be healthier, feel more confident, and find their inner strength so we can show up as our best selves. Learn foundations for staying calmer and more resilient under stress in our upcoming program, Surfing Emotional Currents. Register free at confidentpregnancy.com/SEC. And for Birthstone, the Birthstone Center for Appalachian Perinatal Resilience strengthens perinatal health in Western North Carolina by centering families, uplifting birth workers, and advancing equitable access to lactation, doula, and maternal mental health support, building resilience in mountain communities before, during, and after birth. Starting as a small private practice, Birthstone has grown into a regional nonprofit that creates innovative solutions to providing a village for mountain families. Again, we are grateful to all of our sponsors. We do still have availability for additional sponsors. And so if you know anyone who might be interested in that, please reach out to us. And so now let's discuss our homework briefly, because realistically, we could present all of this to you all day long. And if you're not working with it, you're not doing it, you're not going to be ready. So we want to ensure that you have the tools that you need in order to be able to do this work if and when it becomes available or necessary. So the homework, briefly, if you go to this QR code or this link, our digital coordinators are put those links in the chat. This summary is going to have links to all of the aspects of the homework. Basically, what we would like you to do is learn more about the situation in your community. Realistically, what you're preparing for is a disaster in your area. So there's a form that you'll be able to fill out that will be linked from this homework summary, where you can gather some of that information about your community to help you be more ready when that time comes. We want you to review the CDC Rapid Needs Assessment and our SAFE Rapid Needs Assessment, again linked from the summary. There is a trauma-informed emergency response reference sheet. This takes the little bit that we went into, adds a bit more depth, and gives you some of those resources so that you can be more prepared to work with people who have experienced trauma and to keep yourself emotionally healthy and resilient in the case that you need to be working with these issues. I would like you to practice a stress management technique, whether it's one that we've talked about, one from the sheet, or just something that you really enjoy and find helps center you or ground you, help you get back to equilibrium. Try to do that at least once a week, preferably daily, between now and the next time we meet. And if you can, please help us to make this better and to track attendance at the live sessions for your certificate of completion. There is an evaluation of the session that you can complete for us. So these are individual links. Honestly, all you really need is that core link, and it will get you to all of these items. There are additional resources in that Session 1 homework packet as well. There's a link to that e-learning introduction, which if you have not watched that is strongly recommended. Some other resources from the IFE core group, Save the Children, and the Life resources from CGBI. So here is a link to the evaluation if you want to go ahead and do that immediately after this session. It should take you less than 5 minutes, if not shorter than that. And finally, let's do a super quick poll. After today's presentation, how do you feel? Oh, actually, let's put that in the chat. Yes, let's put that in the chat. How are you feeling after we've done this session today? I'm seeing some engaged, motivated, great, curious, hopeful, better informed, awesome. Very happy to see that overall it seems like everybody is feeling like you're gaining more tools, learning more, and able to start learning and be able to be more prepared. So wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So one last thing before we get into the question and answer segment. If you're finding this training valuable, please donate, or if you know anyone who's open to donating. We really, at this point, like every other nonprofit organization, don't really have the funding that we need to be able to do the work that we're doing. So if you have a little bit that you're willing to spare, please select the SAFE team at this link, and you can donate and help us do more of this work. So if you have questions, here's how you can contact us. And I'm going to start with a couple that I know are here in the chat. Give me one moment here. Okay, so there was a question about allergies, with food allergies. As a nutritionist, I'm going to address that one. So when it comes to infant formula and food allergies, this was actually one of the things we wound up spending a lot of time doing. And that was helping parents track down, or specific sites track down, specific types of formula, the hydrolyzed formulas, goat milk formula, and things. Realistically, once you get past the first few days, maybe a week post-emergency, when you're in the contiguous United States, there is more than enough formula. It's just a matter of finding where it is. Even the specialty formulas, even food allergy type formulas. When it comes to slightly older children and things that are maybe a little bit more pervasive, like celiac, gluten allergies, dairy allergies, that can be a little more complicated. But one of the things we're going to want you to do, and why we want you to do that community assessment, is to start learning where those distribution points are going to be, start developing those relationships, even if it's just post-emergency, because as you go out and you have volunteers out at different sites, everybody's going to have different stuff. And you can just start making those connections. So allergies, they're a little bit trickier, but you can still find the resources if you just look around and find it. So let me look, and here's another question that's come in previously. Yes. We are going to email a follow-up that's going to have a link to the homework page. It will have making sure that you get the information from today and a link to the replay. So it might take a day or two to make sure that we get a link to the unedited replay. There will be an edited replay link that will come later. And are there other questions in the main chat that you have seen, Norma? Okay, here we go. Were any of your initial contacts with victim families during the active event that required you to be embedded in the instant command response? I think, if I'm understanding, if so, what did that look like, and if this will be covered later. So if I'm understanding this question properly, you're asking about whether or not we had to be somewhere in the existing response structure. We are going to talk more about this later, but the short answer is no. I went to a FEMA training recently. A couple of members of our team have been to FEMA pediatric disaster response training. And basically one of the things they talked about was volunteers are going to show up. You have to work with them. So when they're talking the government response, hospital response, you do not need permission to show up. Now, do you want to try to develop a relationship with those other organizations and work with them? Absolutely. Everything will go much better if you do. And you do not need to ask anyone permission. You do not need to be part of the command structure. You don't need to do any of those things. But you do need to make sure that you're not a burden on the existing infrastructure, because there won't be much. And you need to make sure that you are not in the way, that you're making things easier, not harder. And we will talk about that more in, I believe it's session 7 or 9, whenever we talk about running on the ground response.
So yeah, and as just a little brief thing, you really need to make sure that you're not being a burden, and that you're not taking resources from where you're going. So when we had that initial response, our volunteers were bringing in all their own food, they were bringing in their own water, they were staying 2 hours away so that they could not take up resources from the communities that were most affected. So it really is important that you tailor your response carefully, and that you're not becoming a burden to the communities that you're trying to serve, or expect them to serve you.
All right. I see a question. Did many areas lose access to cell service internet, or was that maintained? Does one of the locals, Brandy or Janie, want to pop on and unmute and deal with that question?
I can answer if you want, Melinda. If you could get to somewhere in the very beginning, within the first few weeks, if you get to somewhere that had something, so people were congregating in fire department parking lots, grocery stores that had generators up and running, and we were all standing shoulder to shoulder against the wall, getting cell phone service to send text. It was slow to pretty much get any kind of internet access, and it just took time to get all the way out. So most people were driving to other places to get it if they could get it. And as we know, it's very rural here anyway, so cell phone service in some spots was spotty prior to this. So then those people were really dealing with it afterwards with very limited connection, and there's still people dealing with it.
And that's an important thing. I mean, these things are going to take years to reestablish in some cases. You cannot destroy 80 years of infrastructure and rebuild it in a year. There are still roads that are out. There's still places without cell or internet service. And that's just the way these things go.
Yeah, this is part of what we'll talk about later on in the series when we talk about running the on-the-ground response, is you're going to want to make sure that you're not relying on Facebook Messenger to connect with people, or something that needs the internet. You need to have ways to connect with the people who you're partnering with, who are going to help you out without needing the internet. And yeah, we'll talk more about that. I believe somebody had asked a question about whether or not we measure with MUAC. If you want to send us a little bit of information, I believe I have heard of MUAC, but I don't remember specifically off the top of my head what it was. Super briefly, we the phrase we liked to use was we built the plane while flying it, because we did not know really exactly what we were doing. We didn't know what we were getting into. We were just trying to refine, answer the need, respond to the need, and figure out what we were doing as we went along. That's part of why we're doing this training, is to make sure that none of y'all have to do the same thing that we did, which was just go, what are we doing, running around like chicken with our heads cut off, trying to make it happen the best that we could, and making as many mistakes as we did. But we did a lot right, and we didn't do everything right. Okay. So MUAC, I'll let you answer this one. Norma, is mid-upper arm circumference measuring tapes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, we did not do any biometrics like that. Mm-mm.
So I think this is a distinction that, again, we'll talk a bit more about later on, is what can you have volunteers do? When you're talking about measuring arm circumference, that's a clinical thing. So having somebody in the field, if they're qualified as a clinician, if they have the ability to be able to do that, they can perhaps decide to do that, but there's complications around that. If you've got a it's not something you want to be talking about training volunteers to do, because that brings in a whole nother realm of liability. So, Judy, who has your hand raised, let's go ahead and you can unmute.
Yeah, MUAC measures wasting, which is not usually a problem in the US. However, actually, a number of countries where they do have wasting problems, they do train community volunteers to measure MUAC. And since we have an international audience on these webinars, it might be good to think about in the future episodes, think a little bit about some of the international implications, and I'd be happy to help you with that.
That is an important consideration, because while we can speak to issues in the United States, there is a certain amount of forgiveness over permission that does happen in disaster response, especially the early days. And yes, maybe reach out and we would appreciate understanding a little bit more about the international implications and how we can support that as well.
Yeah, and we recognize, those of you who have that international experience, please teach us. We're still learning. We're only here because we're mad that this is still an issue, because we know that the international documents, operational guidance for infant feeding and emergencies has been out for years, for decades. Why are we reinventing the wheel in the United States? Because we're the United States, I guess. I don't know. But we know, we recognize that we have a lot to learn still, and we appreciate everyone's patience and grace with us.
Yes. Okay, so there's a question from Zia. Is there a plan to create a database so that we can connect with those of us during the disasters? Absolutely. We're still getting some of this all put together, but we are planning to have a group where there will be some way for people to ask questions and discuss things in between, and also basically like I think the familiar name we were kind of using for it was a crud something happened, I need help list, where you could send a message out to that, using a text message, and get people who could help and respond. So yes, we're going to be trying to make sure that we all stay connected. One of the videos in your packet was a USAID video. Is that still a thing? Well, if you're talking about is USAID still a thing, I'm going to admit not knowing, but the video content is still good and useful. All right, so thank you all so much for coming. We're so happy to see so many people who are interested in getting this work out there and really shifting things so that infant and young child feeding in emergencies becomes an integral part of disaster response, not an afterthought that usually is overlooked. And the way that we're going to make this change, the way this is going to become a movement, is because of all of you. So thank you so much for showing up, for being here, and we will see you all next month.